This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. What's the one startup lesson that never changes, no matter what your specific situation is? How do you flesh out and test a B2B idea before spending a single dollar on building it? What's the surprising test to tell if you've priced your offering not too high, not too low, but just right? In this episode, Vanessa Liu, co-founder and CEO of Sugarwork, talks about the biggest lessons she learned building and helping startups from the Netherlands to the United States. The one thing that's critical for every startup to do, her go-to techniques to test every aspect of her product, how to get pricing right, and much more. Now, here's Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa. We're so excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining us on Invisible Inc.
Thank you so much for having me, Shubha.
So we've got a lot to talk about. Let's start off with your early career. You spent quite a bit of time at McKinsey, but your experience there was not that of the typical consultant. So what were your biggest learnings there? What was your involvement and what did you learn about starting businesses while you were at McKinsey?
Yeah, well, maybe I should just preface it by saying why I went to McKinsey in the first place. Like, I was an aspiring astronaut for many years until I was almost about to graduate out of college. And it was only during my senior year that I realized, wait a second, I might be working on something very small for about 10 years on the research side and not be able to have the impact that I wanted. So I started meandering. And I came to business because I realized that there were so many instances of economic development and work that you can do to spur on economies and also to create jobs. And so that's how I came into McKinsey. And the technology side was what I fell into during my third project. I was asked to work on creating a free internet service provider back in the day when that was a thing. And I was doing that for the Dutch market. And so I was there crafting the business plan, trying to figure out what that could look like for the Dutch market. And then when the client said, go, could you just go and build this for us? I started working with web designers and engineers so that we can get this off the ground. And in 8 months' time, we were able to launch the fourth largest free ISP in the Dutch market, which was exhilarating. It was just like really, really exhilarating. And that gave me my first taste in terms of what it's like to start a company. So I started doing that again and again and again. I stayed at McKinsey for 10 years, like much longer than anticipated, because I was getting this type of work with our clients. And it was almost like a drug that I just kept on going back to. That was my time at McKinsey, and my time since McKinsey has also been very similar, actually.
That was a really unique combination of having the funding, but also the freedom to build something new, which you either get one or you don't, or you get the other. What were the biggest takeaways in terms of building new things that you took from that experience?
I think so much of business building is just being able to get something tested out there and in front of customers. I think so much of the time, and I think corporates in general are just nervous about putting something out there that it might not yet be fully baked. And that's like what I learned. Like, you just have to sometimes just get something out there. And it's okay, like in the beginning, if you just have enough there so that your customers can touch it, can work with it, can see, is this something good? That was a very, very critical learning that I had. So that was number one. I think number two, in terms of, in addition to bias towards action, being able to then try to get something out there with a small team. I think especially when you think about innovation in a large company, there's so much of a desire to have everybody have a stake in it and to be able to have a say. And I think that's the beauty of starting things that are new is if you're nimble, if you have a small team, you can get going all that much faster. So that's like something that is a takeaway that I've always just leaned upon companies to do, to say, like, look, if you're trying to innovate from the inside, don't choke it by having a committee. Because if you have a committee, you can kill things. Give things enough of a runway so that they can try and see if they can surface and to build something very quickly and to have milestones so that you can get them to launch.
It reminds me of Innovator's Dilemma, so we can talk quite a bit about that. So after McKinsey, you went on to a digital media venture fund, and you actually co-founded two portfolio companies. How did you get to be a venture capitalist and co-found companies? Help me understand that.
Yeah, so a venture studio is almost like a hybrid founder plus a venture fund. So my business partner and I, we raised 22 million to start our own businesses that were primarily in the media space. When we went in, which was in 2011, my business partner had at that time co-founded several email newsletter businesses or had invested in ones and grew them to scale. So one of them was a company called Daily Secret, which back in the day, like for women like us, it was like a great email that you got into your inbox. It would tell you what to do, where to go, what to buy. And then Thrillist was another company that was launched on the back of it, but that was for men of a similar demographic in terms of age. And then Tasting Table around food, and then Pure Wow for the older female demographic. And so when we went in, we had a thesis, we had a playbook of how do you launch these companies. And so we were going to go in and launch several of these companies for different demographics that had been overlooked. So we knew that for each type of business, if you put in like basically $2 to $2.5 million of funding, you can get something off the ground. And so that was what we were charged with doing. So we started our first business called Inside Hook, got that off the ground. But then very quickly in 2012, 2013, the media landscape had changed drastically. So we thought, okay, what we need to do is to start thinking about the second business, which we were building already at the time, which was around helping millennials get together. We just thought we have to go away from the email newsletter businesses because they were already getting disintermediated by social media. And so our second business became essentially a way for millennials to get together. And we were taking over nightlife venues during their off hours. And that was the nature of our business because we just thought that's remnant inventory that clubs aren't using. And very quickly, people on the sales side of the Yankees who were getting invitations to these events that their friends were hosting using our platform said, did you ever think about using your platform to sell group tickets on the live event side? And we had been thinking a lot about this, but that was like the call that we were waiting for. So I was a CEO of the business at the time, pivoted the business to that area as to what it is today. And so it's a Series C venture-backed company all around powering the group ticketing for a lot of live events, businesses, and also about 85% of our sports teams in North America.
Congratulations. That is pretty impressive. And it's funny because you said that the email newsletter business had gotten disintermediated. And today we have The Hustle, we have Trends, we have the whole Brew series. So it's funny how things change and then they don't. But that's a pretty fascinating story. So then you had another startup experience, I should say, where you went on to SAP.io Foundries, which is their B2B enterprise accelerator. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was your mission there and what did you pick up through that experience?
So this is SAP's early stage accelerators. And towards the end of my time, after 6 years of being a founder and being very, very tired, getting these businesses off the ground and getting them to a specific scale, I decided that I wanted to have more purpose in the work that I was doing. And I had already seen firsthand that many people of color and many women were just getting left out of the funding equation. And the reason why I knew this was because many of them were coming to me asking for funding. And even though that was not really the model that we had, we were not a venture firm that was handing out money. We were starting our own ideas. But I was giving a lot of advice to these founders. And essentially at SAP, I was about to start my own fund to back women and people of color and to help them with their businesses when I got connected to SAP, and it turned out that they were trying to do the same. They had a mandate to work with women and diverse founders. And so they asked me to run it. And so that was what I went in to do. They wanted me to start accelerators to find founders that were from C to Series C to bring into the SAP ecosystem. And that was what I did across North America. So I was running Techstars like cohorts. And I ended up running 12 of them over 3.5 years and accelerating a portfolio of 87 companies, 80% of which were founded by women and people of color.
That is unbelievable. Congratulations. But I have to ask you, I love the idea of the fund. What was it, just an opportunistic event that led you away from it, or would you even consider it today? What are your thoughts on starting that kind of fund?
I think like as an emerging manager, if you're a first time fund manager, it's more about how do you find the people who can back you for it? I was starting to talk to potential backers when the SAP opportunity came in. And at least for me, how I was thinking about it was I wanted to have significant platform where I can make a difference. And I felt like with a company like SAP, like a north of $100 billion market cap company, that is like one of the behemoths in the enterprise software landscape, that would be a way where I can do that. And I can also then hone the relationships I would have. So down the road, if I wanted to go and start a fund, that I would be able to get that. But that was what I was thinking. I think like, what's been great is that there have been so many funds started in the last few years from emerging managers, which with this type of thesis in mind, or at least like where they are focused on trying to get diverse founders in and underrepresented founders in general into the game, because it's not a pipeline issue. And they've gone on to do quite well as companies.
Excellent. So now you're coming fresh off all of these diverse experiences in the startup journey. So where's your mind at after your SAP experience, and what were your biggest kind of takeaways from that entire stretch from McKinsey all the way to SAP?
I look at business building as a way of solving problems. And for me, I felt like my time at SAP was a way to see what was out there. What are the different technologies that are being used? And how can you, at scale, solve some of the biggest problems out there? I've been interested in longevity and aging for a very long time, ever since I was in college. And I just felt like that was an area that was being overlooked. Like I just didn't see enough investment in the space. I felt like there was so much focus on youth right before the pandemic, right? There's so much focus on millennials and Gen Zs and products and services targeted at them. And I'm like looking around, but wealth is concentrated a lot in people who are older. And there's going to be a very significant wealth transfer moment with baby boomers now aging. And when I was leaving SAP, I knew that I wanted to go back to business building, and I wanted to focus on building a series of businesses around the longevity space. So I decided that it was time for me to go to leave SAP. I had tested the idea of starting something new in the longevity and aging space with several different players. And they said, you should just go out and do this, and we would back you. And so when I left, I had several ideas to launch with, and one of them is what I'm doing right now. So ever since April last year, I've been working on creating an HR tech B2B software platform to help companies hold on to their experienced workforce with flexible arrangements and where knowledge transfer is facilitated. So that's what I've been building. And I really just think that there are so many people now who've been working at companies for a very long time. They're now thinking about leaving the workforce, or at least dialing it down. We're going to see a very significant retirement cliff. And I'm looking to build software that could really help them hold on to this knowledge with these employees, and also help these employees think about how do you keep on remaining purposeful and productive for a much longer period of time.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds exciting. So clearly the digital part of your new venture makes a lot of sense, right? That's been a theme throughout everything that you've done. Help me understand, and the longevity makes sense as well, but you could have gone into health, you could have gone into a whole bunch of other potential domains that are all around the longevity. Were there other ideas you considered? And if so, how did you evaluate those, and why did you pick the one that you ended up picking?
Yes, I definitely have like a roster of ideas, and some of them are more like healthcare focused. Some of them are more caregiving focused. I picked this one to start off with because I think like when it comes to the future of work, that time is now. And I also feel like I want to think about this demographic not as a demographic that is frail. I want to think about this demographic as one that has so much wisdom to provide and to give, and where if we can create software platforms so that their wisdom can be passed on, that would have a tremendous effect on society. And so that was what I decided to start off with. I wanted to have something that like my parents, for instance, could use. They happen to be owners of their own businesses. So my father runs his own law firm, and my mother runs a jewelry manufacturing and crystallization business. And she has like 30 people. They're in their 80s now, and they're able to keep on working because they've created that for themselves. And I think about the portion of the population that has an employer. They're not business owners, and how it's going to be very important to help companies think about how do you keep this workforce agile and there, because if you see what's going on in Japan, you have people who are working well into their 90s, and not because they have to, even though a lot of people might have to from a financial point of view, but because they want to. It gives you connectivity on a human level. And I think that that's so important. I think work is where I've derived a lot of satisfaction. Same with my parents. So that was why I decided that the work front was an area to start off with.
And that makes a lot of sense. We hear a lot about why you, and what is it during the dark moments when you're going to face the challenges. We've all heard the advice that you have to have a personal reason. You have to have some mission-driven reason why you picked this. Somebody asked you that, what would you say in answer to that?
Well, I think for me, I was building something where I knew that basically in a few years' time, I was going to be in a demographic where I can experience ageism. I started hearing stories from people who were maybe 5 to 10 years older than I am, and they were experiencing rampant ageism. Like there was this one woman who I know who's been such an incredible marketer and chief digital officer. And she was looking for her next gig around the pandemic. And she said, this one company told me that they were looking for somebody with more energy. And she's like one of the most energetic people that I thought. And I just started thinking like, I need to work on this. And I think women and people of color are disproportionately affected. Like if I don't work on this, there's going to be even more discrimination at that level. And for some people, so I just feel like this is an opportunity to create something that I would want to see in the workplace for myself.
Love it. I love it. And I'm totally in support of the whole concept. So you have the idea, you've talked to a few backers, you kind of got some sense that it has legs. What did you do then to test it? What kind of experiments did you run? Can you walk me through some of the early steps you took to validate the idea further?
Yeah. So the idea, I only had an idea, but what I did was I put it down on paper and I started testing this with a couple of CEOs and CHROs that I happen to know just to get their feedback. And I was really lucky in that very soon I realized I had 2 companies who were willing to take a bet on me. And they basically said, if you were to build this platform, we would find ways of using it. And so that was what gave me conviction to go out and build this company.
So now you've kind of gotten almost like 2 orders. You've gotten enough legs to make sure that there's something in there. Then what happens? Walk me through the sequence of the steps, because B2B is a very different market than B2C. And I think there's not enough knowledge or wisdom out there in terms of how you do it right. What did you do next? Did you come up with a business model first? Did you come up with a prototype? Did you put a development team together? Can you just give us some nitty gritty around how that all played out?
How that all played out. So the first thing I did was I raised money, because I just felt in order to do this well, I can bootstrap it, but I won't be able to get the best type of engineers on board. And I knew that in order to get this out there, I probably would need to spend at least $500,000 to $1 million, right? It made me realize like I should just go out and get funding. So I started talking to a couple of potential investors I had been talking to, and they said, we'll back you, which is great. Like I was just very, very lucky. I was able to raise my pre-seed round in a very short period of time. Once that happened, and I should say simultaneously, I brought on a co-founder. One of my work best friends from SAP was the SVP of HR. And she was our chief diversity and inclusion officer and head of global health and wellness. And she knows the HR buyer inside and out. And like, I couldn't imagine anybody I would want to build this business with. And so that's how I brought Judith on board. And after we got the money and we just started thinking, well, we have to build a team. We have to think about the prototype. And I had put down on paper what I thought that the actual product should look like. And then set about going out there and finding engineers to work with, and also people on the product and design side, so that we can get into an iteration of let's build the product. So that took a few months. And here we are about to launch our MVP very, very soon because we have a couple of our products now built.
Congratulations. I'm excited to see where that goes. The engineering side is going on its way, but there are other components to the business model. So revenue model, how did you start thinking about, at what point did you start thinking about it? And how did you test both the revenue model and the exact pricing strategy, price points?
Well, I think for us, we haven't gone out there and we're still pre-revenue, but we've tested the pricing with our potential design customers to say, hey, what would you pay in this type of situation for this type of business? And having had a portfolio of 87 companies at SAP.io, whereby maybe about 40% of them were HR tech focused, I knew what pricing benchmarks look like and what companies would think about. So from there, I just decided okay, I think that this could be a usage-based model and we can test what that could look like. And also just to see what the ROI is. And we just ask companies themselves, what would you pay for this? What are the analog types of services you're paying for? How much you're paying there? So you get a sense of what's out there. And the companies that I've worked with, I've always said when it comes to pricing, especially with enterprise, you have to price it based on the value that you're getting. So here, if you're holding on to an experienced worker, and losing an experienced worker can cost upwards on average $350,000 for a company in terms of lost productivity, lost innovation, lost relationships. If I say, hey, I'm just going to take a fraction of that, you're able to hold on to these people for longer. And that knowledge transfer, I'm going to charge you X dollars for it. What do you think? They'll say yes. That's how you gauge it. And that's how you talk to customers about. And I've always said that the moment you know your pricing is right is when your customer grumbles a little, complains a bit, but still pays it.
Neither too, the Goldilocks price moment, right? It's neither too low nor too high, just right.
Exactly.
I love that. So I'm going to keep that in my little notebook for future. One other question. So you had the benefit of knowing what the market was and knowing your domain very well. In the B2B market, let's say there's someone else who doesn't have that insight. What recommendation would you give? Let's say it's a portfolio company in one of the cohorts that you oversaw during your SAP days. What advice would you give a founder in the B2B, particularly the tech space, to get better understanding of what potential pricing points could be?
I think so much of this is about going out there and doing the benchmarking and thinking about your value and knowing what pain point you're solving for. I've seen so many companies build beautiful product, but I'm always well, it's beautiful, but what problem are you solving for your customers? If you don't understand that well, then you can't price it adequately. And so I always tell the companies I work with, you have to understand what it is that you're solving for and to ask, what are their alternatives for solving that? And then you could see basically on the back of that, how much value you're probably providing. So the value-based side is so important. I know so many companies that go in, they're yeah, I'm pricing this at $500 a month. I'm why? That just sounds so low. Is that all you're going to charge an enterprise? Just based on that? They're yeah, because we don't want it to be too low. I'm how are you gauging this at all? I think you have to go out there and really understand your customers. And so I think that talking to potential customers, understanding where they're coming from, there's nothing compared to that, getting that real life.
That makes a lot of sense. So is it fair to say then that at least in this B2B space, having domain expertise is more important than maybe a B2C space where you can come in and make it easier to gain a foothold?
I think it's you have to know your customer well. I think you have to know what it is that they're willing to do. I think domain expertise in B2B is so important. A lot of people think that B2B is unsexy because it's just not what people think about. But I find it extremely exciting if you're solving a company's very big problem for them, right? What's keeping them up at night? That's exciting. You could get 6-figure deals and 7-figure deals that. That I think is very exciting, but the sales cycle is much longer as a result.
Got it. And to that point, how do you think about the customer acquisition model once you're past this beta and kind of into more of a end state type of or growth situation?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we can have something repeatable. So the way that we see it in the beginning, we have 4 design partners that we're going to work with. So we're going to see how it works in the wild within their companies. And they're very forgiving. Like they know us and they would forgive us. And if we make mistakes, once we get that product down and we think like there's something there, then we would just turn on and be like, can we sell this to other customers? Can we make them use kind of like user studies and use cases so that we could take it to other customers? So that's what we're going to do. And so we could have something repeatable.
So it sounds like that's a model that you could pretty much lift and shift into any B2B situation where you use each client as a use case, you collect the data, you go in knowing that you have to be able to prove something to your next customer, and then you keep kind of iterating on that and improving it with each new customer. Is that kind of how you would think about
Yes.
a customer acquisition model? So that brings me to the question of collecting data and being very thoughtful and intentional about whether it's product building, design, testing, that you have to be very data oriented. Are there some general principles in terms of how a founder should think about what kinds of data she should collect or how she should go about doing it so she doesn't overwhelm either herself or her team in the process of doing that?
The great thing is that you have so many tools out there to capture this data. Like, how are customers using your piece of software? Where are people dropping off? Where are they spending a lot of time? And you could use like sites like Keep, for instance, and they can provide you the telemetry in terms of what is going on. So I think that's very, very important to have those feedback loops in place. Like we're going to be very data driven in terms of what it is that we're going to try to do. If we see people getting stuck, we're going to try to understand why are they stuck, and so that we can unpack that and remove the friction, because so much of being able to hone software is understanding where the friction points are. Like when you pick up and use Airbnb right now, right? It's so easy to use, but that's come from years of testing, of using it with consumers who were able to say, oh, this was really hard for me to find. And so this is like what I'm going to do to change that.
Got it. So building on that, we've talked about some of the most critical, call it market-facing capabilities. One other piece that I've heard come up again and again, especially in this market, B2B enterprise market, is the ability or the need to keep your customers happy, because each customer is different. Each one's a pretty high-ticket deal, and everybody wants it a little different, and everybody wants it just their way and not somebody else's way. So there's 2 problems with that, potential problems. One is in terms of product design, how each person wants it kind of just their way. And then secondly is how do you keep this customer happy and serviced, preferably over the long term? So how are you thinking about those 2 aspects as you grow and build out to full scale?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're thinking about right now. Like, how do you work with your early customers where they might have a lot of requests? And there's always going to be a question of, is this a request that's only going to be idiosyncratic for this organization? Or is this going to be one that many other customers are going to ask for? Making that difference to say like, hey, this is something we can do. That other bit, we don't see other customers using it. We might put that farther down on the roadmap. But being able to be very open with them about it, to say, does this work? Like, what else do you need to see? And making sure that you have that open dialogue for feedback, and where they are part of the design process, which is super exciting, and also where they can get first dibs on a particular product feature.
Got it. That's pretty helpful. So then coming back to a slightly different piece of the whole puzzle, this is a long cycle process where you start off, there's several months, you have multiple folks who are in the picture. How did you and your team hold yourselves accountable to the progress? And especially given that you took on pre-seed funding, to what extent were they involved in terms of setting the milestones, and how often did you have to interact with them internally as well, and then also with investors?
I think like internally, I mean, a lot of the goal setting, like it comes from my co-founder and I. We basically said, well, for the first year, I know what it's like to get to the next tranche. I'm like, we got to get at least 10 customers using this and to see how this goes. And so that's really important. In terms of investors, they provide feedback on the milestones that we provide. And that's, I'm really lucky in terms of having very understanding investors who are just like, yes, you know what it is that you're doing, because you're an experienced founder. At least this is your third go around. And so you know what it is that you need to go after.
So you get a little bit of grace and a few more degrees of freedom than potentially a first-time founder. So then coming back then again to the funding question, you've you've gotten your pre-seed funding and you need more funding. How do you think at the get-go, how did you think about funding? How are you thinking about it now? And how do you prepare yourself for the fundraising that's going to come down the line?
Yeah. So the way that I see it, like, I know I'll be able to take the business to a certain place before I need to raise again. Like, I want to be able to have specific milestones in place so that I can then scale the team. It's always about, what do I need to do? What do I need to use the money for? Is to scale. In this MVP stage, the whole idea is to make sure that we're able to launch a product out there that people will really, really love and will want to use. And then it'll be like, I know that it'll be time to raise again when I'm like, I just can't manage all of the sales by myself. Like right now, our team is pretty much product and engineers, right? And in the moment when that happens, I'll gladly try to hire salespeople because we're bringing revenue in. And can we step that up? So that's like what we're going to try to move towards and think about the milestones. Like I usually tell companies for seed, that means you have a product launched. You also have like some type of traction with customers, some type of early signs of product market fit. When you get to an A, you have to have product market fit there, and you have to have some type of repeatable sales process so that you can just scale that out. So that's like what I'm thinking of in terms of the tranches.
And that makes total sense. So can we talk for 1 second about product market fit? I've read a lot of stuff on both sides of the product market fit. There's some who swear by it, won't move forward. There's all kinds of metrics in terms of this is when you've hit product market fit. And there are others who say this is just something that Silicon Valley VC folks made up. What do you think of as product market fit, and what should a founder be shooting for to ensure that she has actually nailed product market fit?
When it comes to product market fit, are you able to put out something that is just like not great, but people are just desperate to use it? They're just like, oh, I cannot imagine life without this. That's when you know you have product market fit. And I think it's so important. I don't think it's just like, I feel like the term hasn't been around for all that long, but it is a concept that you think of. If you think about, Sarah Blakely, when she first manufactured Spanx, right? It was literally, let me just take some pantyhose and just snip it on the bottom, and that gives me shape. It was like janky. It's not like a very, very sophisticated product, but women were like, I can't live without this. That's when you know you have something that people really want. And that's the aha moment that you're trying to look for. Do you have something that companies are like, oh, this is so good in comparison to how we would do it beforehand? So that's, I think, is so key to look at.
So then there's two aspects to it, right? There's one, you as a founder need to be convinced that you found it so that you can then go ahead and scale that, whatever that moment is, that inflection point. How do you know that you don't have false positives if it's just one customer? And then secondly, what do you need to demonstrate to investors that you have indeed found product market fit?
Yeah. So I think like having the repeatable sales process, I think here, founder-led sales can get you very, very far. And I know that right now that's where we are in the business. Like I can call upon, I'm lucky, like probably more than a handful of companies to say, hey, will you try my product? And they'll probably say yes, right? But the true test will be approaching companies I've never met before to say, would you try this? And to see if they love it. And if you can, like to have somebody sell the business who's not like the charismatic founder. And that I think is when you know you have something that is truly repeatable. Like I always look at how the companies have gotten their early customers.
So it almost feels like you should be ready to almost hand it off to an external salesperson. I mean, external to you, not. That feels like a good test for if they can do it and still get companies to sign up, then you probably have something that's not reliant on you as a founder or your passion or your energy in terms of bringing orders to the table. Is that a fair characterization?
I think so. And also where you're just like, hey, I can see this. This has happened before. I can see this go again and again and again with different customers that are in the same place.
Excellent. So now I'm going to ask you about fundraising and sources of capital. You've had experiences on both sides of the table in terms of helping other companies raise as well as you potentially raising in the future. How do you think about a company developing a capital stack? So what should the considerations be, and how should you come up with a stack that says, I need this much, I get this from XYZ sources, whether it's angels, VCs, what have you, right? Dilutive, non-dilutive. Is there like a high level approach that you could lay out that a founder could use to develop a capital stack?
The way that I always think about it is in terms of the stage. And of course, I think if we're thinking about the stage earliest on, like getting the first checks into the business is usually the toughest for first time founders because you're asking people to take a bet on you. You don't have a track record just yet. And like I always think about trying to go for as supportive of an investor base as possible. That's the first and foremost thing that I look for. And then I start thinking, how much do I need? And how many investors do I actually want to handle? Because you don't want to have so many investors to speak to. That's a lot of work, a lot of investor management that would waste your time. So I think it's important to get that right. Like, so if you're raising $1 million, it makes sense to me to be like, hey, I'm going to cap the investors at say 10. So on average, that the check size is 100,000. Now, not many people can write a $100,000 check. So that's just something to keep in mind. But if you're asking for that type of money, you probably have at least something to prove to go out there with. That's how I would think about it. I also think about getting investors on board at the get-go who can help you with the business. Like I happen to have incredible angels who are in areas that I know I'm not great at. Like I'm not a technical co-founder. I'm not somebody who has been an engineer before, but I have somebody who is the CEO of a company, but he's essentially been their head of product. I have another investor on board who's a CTO of a very large e-commerce business. I have somebody also on board who is an incredible tech recruiter. So they're able to help me because angels in the beginning want to help you because that's part of the fun of being in a business in the first place. And so thinking through strategic angels to bring on board is very important.
Great. And that triggered another question, which is in terms of this board of advisors, some of which can be your angel investors. Do you have any thoughts or counsel suggestions to founders on when they should bring on a board of advisors and what they should keep in mind? Who makes a good advisor, who doesn't, and how to compose that team together so that they have the best shot at scaling this business?
I actually think about putting together a board of advisors from the get-go. That's what I did because these are people who can help you in areas such as somebody who can help you think about the product and the engineering side, somebody who can help you think about sales and marketing if you need that, somebody who could help you think about customers. And that's like another area. I think it's so important to have that from the get-go. It's a very, very tough way of starting a business without having those types of people in your back pocket who you can lean on for relationships.
How to know if somebody's going to be a good advisor or not a great advisor? What is a test for that?
I don't offer people advisory roles from the get-go. I need to get to know them. It has to be people that you trust. It has to be people that you think can really add value. And that's so important. And also asking other founders, have they worked with these people before? What is their reputation? It's so important. I work with people that I tend to know, or I know other people who've worked with them. So it's like a very, very tight-knit type of vetting that I have.
It works for you, and I can certainly see why it would work. It definitely de-risks a lot of the volatility you'd face early on. So then kind of coming back to your journey as an entrepreneur in this entire setup, was there any other support that you discovered or realized that you needed along the way? If so, what was that kind of support and how did you get it?
I think like for me, whenever you're building a product, it is always about getting the constant feedback, getting people out there. Because it's my third go around, I knew what it was that I needed to do, like stack the chips, have advisors from the beginning and to work with them. Though no matter what, when you're putting together a new team and you're thinking about the dynamics there, you just never know. Like when you're working with people for the first time, like on the engineering or the design side, are they going to fit with you culturally and what's going to happen there? So giving yourself the leeway to work with people because you won't really know how you gel until you start working with them. And so planning for that, because like sometimes the first people that you get on board, sometimes they're great and they are the right hires and sometimes they're not. And so just to be aware of that is very, very important.
Got it. And what have been some of the challenges that you've faced? Clearly you come to the game from a very different place than what I'll call a typical first time or even a typical founder. Have there still been challenges? And if so, what kind of challenges have they been?
I think for me, it's always like about the people challenges. Like I want to make sure that we are cultivating a culture of excellence and that we have a team that is just working so, so well together. So I think in the beginning, my big challenges have been like on the people front, have been, are we getting the right hires? Always this, it takes you longer than anticipated. And so that's been the challenge that I certainly have seen over the last year. It's gotten a little bit easier now that the tech market at least is a little bit more founder friendly, because so many people were just going to the large fangs and being very well compensated. There's now a lot of talent available, but it's still hard to find. And so being able to navigate that is certainly been our number one challenge.
And what has helped you navigate that? And what have you learned about picking the right people or getting the right people outside of external market forces?
For us, it's actually having the people to help you vet. And so that's what I lean upon our advisors for. Can you suss these people out? Can you just give me a perspective of what you think about them?
Have there been any inner challenges in terms of dark moments where you've been tested? And if so, how have you overcome those?
Not this go around, thank goodness, because I feel like everything I've seen, I'm like, I've been there, done that. So nothing really faces me.
On the flip side, has there been any moment in this journey which has been like a highlight that you feel really good about that you didn't expect going in?
Nothing that I didn't expect, but nothing feels better than showing your product to a customer for the first time and they say like, wow, this is great. I want to use it. It's a high that I get every single time.
You want to keep getting that high, right? You never want to get desensitized to that high. And as an Asian and as a woman of color, what would be your comments in terms of the founding journey itself and any bits of wisdom that you would offer to others like you?
I lean upon so many other founders like for this part of the journey. And like I'm a part of a couple of women's groups and women founder groups, and they're great because sometimes it feels really lonely. And I think like being in there and realizing that you're not alone and there's support out there is very important. And there's like a lot of opportunity to get help from large corporates. They have great programs. So that's just something to think about as well. I happen to be part of a group called Gold House Futures. And so Gold House is an Asian focused community. And they also are just bringing founders on board. And it's been great, like just to meet other Asian founders. I'm also part of this group called Dreamers and Doers, where in the beginning you might be like, well, I need somebody to look at copy right away. And you could just ping the group and be like, hey, do you know anybody who can do this? So much of that is great. And so having that is wonderful. And so that's like what we have now.
Fantastic. So is there anything at all that you wish you knew at the start of this journey? You already came to the starting line well equipped, but was there something that you learned along the way that you didn't know starting out?
I think like just being flexible. I mean, I knew that going in already, but just being open to flex and think about what to launch with is very important. And I just saw that here. Like what we're building is to help companies hold on to employees with flexible arrangements and to facilitate knowledge transfer. In the beginning, we just thought, oh, let's go in with the flexible arrangement side. But now as the economy has turned to cost cutting and layoffs, the knowledge transfer piece is actually even more important. So remaining nimble is something really important. And, I just feel like being able to have that going in to be like, what are the black swan events that could change your business? Being very clear about that is important.
And have you discovered any ways of figuring those out and developing better intuition and judgment around those black swan events? What would help you hone your skill with that?
I think it's more like just being aware of what's going on, being aware of the trends, talking to customers, and having that be something constant to get that input is really, really important.
Fantastic. So to conclude, what one piece of advice, one takeaway would you give to others listening in who want to follow in your footsteps?
I just think that it's so important to follow something that you have a deep conviction on. And so if you have something that you can't let go of, go for it. Like so many people say like, oh, I'm so risk averse. And I always say, well, what is the downside? The downside is that you'll just default to doing something you've done before. But if you have an idea that you're very passionate about, why not give it a try? Because it's one of the most exhilarating journeys you can ever have in your lifetime.
Fantastic. And is there anything you wish I had asked you, but I didn't?
I think you covered a lot.
So I like to hear. So this has been an absolutely amazing conversation, Vanessa. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that I learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure others will learn quite a bit too from this. So thank you for being so generous with your time and insights.
No, thank you so much.
Vanessa is that rare breed of entrepreneur who comes to the game fully prepared and skilled. So her insights were especially valuable to me. Here are 10 that really resonated. 1. Everyone from the founder in the spare bedroom to the large corporate struggles with getting something new out there. The fear is real, and you must overcome it. 2. Having the playbook for your specific business model is a secret superpower. Get it if you can before you start. 3. Go with the opportunity that shows up. Now may not be the best time to start your company if there's a skill or resource building option that falls in your lap. 4. Understand the themes that drive you. These are fertile fishing grounds for your next venture, and don't forget to keep a roster of them. 5. Getting feedback is important, but who you get it from and what you ask for are even more important. The best feedback of all is pre-orders from your target customers. 6. Carefully think through the work and what it will cost you before you start. It's not always about bootstrapping. Sometimes you may need to raise first. 7. Quantifiable customer value is the holy grail for B2B startups. Spend disproportionate time on understanding it accurately. 8. On that note, don't underestimate the power of a B2B business. Often, unsexy markets are extremely lucrative. 9. Use data everywhere you can. Use it skillfully to understand where to invest your scarce startup resources, especially with product development. 10. Especially as a first-time founder, be careful who you get money from, how much, and why they're investing. So, product, pricing, people, funding. What one area is your biggest and best bet right now? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achieve.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.